Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about raiding in World of Warcraft Burning Crusade Classic, specifically about raiding in Tier 5, Serpent Shrine Cavern and Tempest Keep, and how guilds have been dealing with Tier 5 so far. Spoiler alert, not so well. Yes, the top guilds, the ones with people that have had that experience on either retail or private servers, some of these guilds having played for weeks, if not months, on their own private servers to learn the content, to get it down perfectly so they can do very quick progression. And all of these top guilds having done plenty of PTR testing, yeah, those guilds have cleared the content very quickly and efficiently. But the normal raiding guilds, which don't have that going for them, they've struggled quite a bit. How much have they struggled with it? Well, if we look at Warcraft logs, according to the current data, we see that out of about 15,000 guilds or so, only 1,900 have managed to kill both Vash and Kael'thas. So they've cleared the entirety of Tier 5 in, what, less than 2 weeks, 2 resets anyway. They've managed to do that. So about 12% or so of guilds have managed to clear the entirety of Tier 5. Combined total of guilds that have managed to kill either Vash or Kael'thas is also not that great. It's more than a quarter, between a quarter and a fifth of all guilds. Again, not great numbers, and less than half of guilds have even managed to get to Kael'thas or Vash if we're looking at all these guilds on Warcraft logs that have 8 out of 10. So they've managed to get to both Kael'thas and Vash, and then they've gotten stuck. Why is this happening? Why is this kind of situation occurring? Well, for quite a long time, there were many people on Reddit, on Discords, on my own channel comment section that were saying, oh, raiding content is going to be easy content. You don't need to build a proper raid setup. It's going to be easy. We're going to smash through it. And that was reinforced in their minds by how easy Tier 4 ended up being. But Tier 4 was never proper raiding content in Burning Crusade. Karazhan was always a catch-up raid. It was cleared back in the day in the buggy, messy situation that it was. All of it was cleared back in the day, keeping in mind people didn't level as quickly back in the day, or didn't know what they were getting into, but it was cleared back in the day in 2 weeks, and I'm counting Nightbane here. Gruul was killed very quickly. Magferdan, yeah, he took longer. Bugs, issues, people not knowing to click cubes, but Mag was done on Classic because people have gotten better computers. They can coordinate clicking on cubes much better. Magferdan was killed by guilds with 1 tank and 1 healer. That is not at all representative of how the rest of the Burning Crusade raiding experience is going to be. Far from it. So you end up in this situation where a lot of guilds think, and a lot of people think, oh, it's going to be easy, we don't have to bother with it. I think the PTR should have been a wake-up call for a lot of people, and people should have adjusted, but they didn't. A lot of guilds built bad rosters. A lot of people also quit. Let's be clear on this. A lot of people quit, leaving a lot of guilds in bad positions, but then you get to a lot of guilds like, oh, we're going to have 2 free rows, nonsense like that. We're going to have X number of melee. We're going to have 2 full melee groups, and so on and so forth. And in Tier 5, which is notoriously bad for melee, as an example, that's just not going to work. It's not surprising that the bosses people have gotten stuck on are things like Arlar, for instance, or Morgrim, or other bosses. It's not a surprise with that kind of mentality that people brought into Tier 5 raiding. And here's the thing, Tier 5 raiding is the easiest raiding tier of the proper 25-man raiding tiers in TBC. I'm not counting Kara, Gruul, Mag, or Zul'Aman here. I'm counting Black Temple, Mount Hyjal, Sunwell Plateau. If you think Tier 5 is already a problem, and it is, a lot of guilds are struggling with it. If you think Tier 5 is a problem, if you think Tier 5 is difficult, let me just say that Black Temple, not all of it, sure, Magentis is a joke, or Wrath of Winter, Channel Hyjal, it's a joke. But Black Temple and Mount Hyjal, overall, are considerably more difficult. And Sunwell is far more difficult than any other. Every single boss in Sunwell Plateau is far more difficult than any other boss in the game. That's what guilds have to look forward to. And with the dwindling player base, without a surge of players, things are actually going to get difficult for guilds just because they won't be able to build the rosters they want, and a lot of them will struggle. These numbers, if the player base stays as it is currently, are just going to get significantly worse in Black Temple, Mount Hyjal, and especially in Sunwell Plateau. Now, looking at the statistics boss by boss, we can see that Leofrost the Blind is the easiest boss by far in an entire raiding tier with a 62% kill rate. Now, this is based on the number of attempts versus actual kills. So you might say, oh, this is pretty good. Just to give you an idea, bosses in retail right now, the first boss of the retail tier has like an 80% kill rate. Granted, that didn't happen overnight. The 62% kill rate on Leofrost Blind is not horrible at all right now, I guess. I would say it's a bit surprising that 38% of attempts on him are still wipes, but not necessarily the worst figures in the world. But yeah, Leo is easy. You just need to manage the Whirlwind. Don't pull Fret from the Warlock when he transforms. Do a lot of DPS, don't get mind control of that. He was very easy on the PTR. He's very easy right now. Then you have a Void Reaver. A bit lower percentage attempts, but that's because people can't manage their Fret. That's really all there is to Void Reaver. He's a fucking easy boss. All you need to do is having tanks pushing Fret and DPSers understanding that they can't go fucking crazy. They need to give tanks time to build their Fret. They need to avoid the orbs. People can wipe, right, on this boss. And I think that's the reason, like, I wouldn't be shocked at all if many of the Void Reaver attempts are just people over fretting the tanks and screwing up their entire raid team as a result of it because they're not used to it. Tanks have fret issues and they can't really control it as well on Void Reaver as they can on other bosses. And then you have Phantom Lord Carafres, where we see the percentage going down to 44% kill rate. On FLK, who was a very easy boss on the PTR, but keeping in mind, on the PTR, we get all that juicy gear, we get free consumables. People are not gonna, you know, normal guilds, some people are gonna slack on consumables, especially on bosses that they think are gonna be easy. But on FLK, well, there's an RNG factor wherein the Shaman can kill your tank potentially. There's a lot of damage potential. You can get very high burst damage. People can die. You also need to have people coordinating, playing properly with killing the totems, interrupting the healer, positioning, getting the pull down. I'm sure many of the FLK wipes are actually because of mismanaged pull. But if you get a couple of dads down on FLK, he's a fairly easy boss to deal with. Just don't let the tanks die. Deal with that burst and keep people alive. Then Hydra's 41% almost, so almost 60% wipe rate. On Hydra's, this makes sense for a couple of reasons. Hydra's was very easy on the PTR, but I was on the PTR. Not everyone played on the PTR because some people are just like, oh, I don't want to spoil it, whatever. There's a couple of factors. So some people didn't play it, they don't have the experience, but there's more to it than just that. The first thing is the actual resistance gearing. On PTR, we got free resistance gearing. On actual live, we don't. So you can imagine that there's plenty of tanks playing with suboptimal resistance gearing in, let's say, normal raiding guilds, right? Not everyone is going to pour in thousands upon thousands of gold to get resistance gearing. And because of issues with the player base in general, I'm sure some guilds many guilds are struggling with their tanks in general. So that's a big factor on Hydra's, the resistance gearing itself. You do need a good amount of resistance gearing. You can't slack on that, because if you slack on that, even if you survive, your fret is going to be lower. And if fret is going to be lower, then people can pull aggro. If people pull aggro, it may very well be a wipe. But on top of that, there's also Hydra's can be easy if the entire raid is playing properly. So if the entire raid is doing a lot of DPS, like if, say, you pull the boss with a full rage bar with a druid or a warrior, then you pop a bloodlust like 20 seconds into the fight, and people can, and if your raid can bring it to like 50% before the first transition, then he's a lot easier, because then it means you have less transitions. Then it means you can kill him maybe in 1-2 transitions. That makes the fight significantly easier. But if you don't have that kind of DPS, then things can get a lot more difficult very quickly. And with people running around with bullshit raid rosters and maybe not even knowing how to play properly, like with a lot of melee will not work very well on Hydra's, especially if they don't spread properly and then they get all ice tombed, then your DPS output drops significantly. There's a lot of damage that can be done. There's a lot of easy ways to mess up on Hydra's and wipe your raid, and I think this is reflected in the numbers. Then we have a Lurker below at 40% kill rate, so just slightly worse than Hydra's. Third hardest boss in Serpent Shrine. One of the things I noticed on the PTR playing against Lurker below is how many people can't handle Spout. Simple as that. Like, the reason a lot of people wipe on Lurker is because a lot of people fuck up the Spout, they get knocked, they die, the raid eventually runs out of people to be able to deal with the ads properly, they get overwhelmed, the raid wipes. That's something that I've seen on the PTR, and that's likely what's going on right here as well. It's just the Spout, which ultimately affects ad management, which ultimately affects how your raid is able to survive. So yeah, it's just death by 1,000 cuts on Lurker, but losing a person, losing people with every Spout, and I'm sure that's happening on a lot of guilds. Like, there's always someone dying to a Spout. That does have an impact. Moving even lower, Astromancer Solarian of 36.3% kill rate. On Solarian, there is a number of factors. One is the resistance gearing itself. You need very high arcane resistance on 2 people to be able to deal with the debuff properly. But that's just the start. That's the easy part. The arcane resistance, unlike, say, frost resistance, is significantly cheaper. But that's just the start. Beyond that, you also need people handling the debuff to do it properly. So a lot of people can mess it up. A lot of people don't understand it. It's very simple, really. You get she targets a person, she puts a debuff on them. That person then needs to go to the 2 people, the 2 tanks that have the arcane resistance gearing standing to the side, pass it to them. After that first debuff expires, you get a second debuff. That second debuff just means you take more damage. So what you want to do, you want to stand aside from the raid so you don't potentially, so let's say you're less at risk of getting the first debuff. So that's how you deal with it. And that's what I imagine quite a few people are struggling to understand. Then there's the fact of how she does damage. She does arcane missiles on random people. And it can be pretty rough for healers to keep those kind of people up. And I'm pretty certain that there's a lot of guilds out there that are losing a ton of people simply because the healers aren't ready. It's an adjustment. Healers are having to adjust in this rate here. It's not the cakewalk that Classic or Tier 4 have been. Here, you have to actually heal in a very different and more intelligent way. And then you have Arlar, 23.2%. Well, Arlar was considered the hardest boss in the entirety of Tier 5. He isn't in Classic so far. I'm sure this might end up changing. But there's a couple of factors that make Arlar difficult. One is the RNG factor. So Arlar has random positioning in Phase 1, and he can spawn a random number of ads, up to 3, when he changes position, according to Blizzard themselves. That's already an RNG factor. If you get lucky, you may only need 3 tanks upstairs. You may only need 3 tanks, all of them upstairs, to deal with him. If you get unlucky, you may need 4. So that's one factor. Another factor is the design of the fight. The ads explode when they die, and the boss is constantly moving, so melee are not that great on the boss, especially with the random positioning. So a lot of guilds running with too much melee because they think the content is going to be a fucking cakewalk, and surprise, surprise, they're struggling because of that. Because Arlar is not a melee-friendly fight, and that's just Phase 1. You need to kill ads, you need to kill a boss, you need to deal with positioning. But that's just Phase 1. Top guilds, yeah, they just pop a Bloodlust or 2. Well, that they have high enough DPS that they smash it to pieces. But normal guilds, yeah, they actually have to play the phase properly. And then Phase 2, well, in Phase 2 you get ads, you need to handle positioning, you need to stack. There's some tricks I'm sure people don't know, like, oh, you can, you know, if the damage is spread among people and you need to stack, you can use snake traps and have the tank on the ads kite an ad for that, trigger the snake traps, the snakes share the damage as well. I think, I'm not, you know, my testing on Arlar was limited on the PTR, but that's something we used to actually do, and it might very well work in Classic as well. But those are the kind of things people need to learn. So I'm sure the percentage is going to go higher, but there's also an RNG factor, which is Arlar charging. A random person potentially one-shotting. People that have low HP may need to wear higher HP gear. They may need to be pre-shielded. Those people who are vulnerable, clothies, healers. Then there's the fact that when he respawns, the ads that he spawns may go after a healer. healers need to understand that once the meteor lands, they don't need to instantly heal people. That they need to wait 2 seconds for the tank to be able to pick up the fucking ads that just spawned. That's also another factor that needs to be brought to attention. Then there's Morgrim Tidewalker, 15% kill rate. So, not great. A lot of wipes on this guy. Part of it is RNG. A big part of it can be RNG factor. I saw so many fucking wipes on this guy on good attempts on the PTR just because he would RNG put people in the bubbles, including the tanks that are assigned to that or the tank that's assigned to that. Beyond that, there's also factors in terms of tactics. The boss hits very fucking hard and the ads hit very hard. So it's a challenge for healers, and also tanks need to use more survival gearing than they've been used to. So it's a challenge from that perspective. But on top of that, it's also how you heal. When he does an earthquake, he spawns murlocs. When those murlocs spawn, after that earthquake, the only people that need healing are the tanks. No one else should be healed, because if you heal the raid, if you top it off instantly, then the healers are going to get aggro, they're going to die to the murlocs. What you should do, what the raid should do on Morgrim, and this is a learning process for a lot of guilds, for a lot of healers, what people should do, only heal the tanks. Let the paladin tank, who's handling the ads, do a couple of holy lights on some warlocks who may or may not need to life tap, but do a couple of holy lights on some warlocks to get aggro on the ads. That's how you deal with it. But then you go back to the RNG factor, where that paladin tank may be tombed right at the very moment the ads are spawning, and you may wipe to that alone. So very annoying fight from that perspective. That's why he's so difficult. That's why only 15% of guild of people have gone to him. Or rather, that's why the kill percentage of all attempts is only 15% on Morgrim Tidewalker. Hell, a lot of guilds have struggled to actually kill him. Anyway, then you have Vash and Kael'thas. Vash is actually the hardest boss in the entire raiding tier. Kael'thas, yeah, he's still pretty difficult. Don't get me wrong, there's a DPS check. But let's start with him. Why is Kael'thas so difficult? Yeah, the threat issue that Blizzard has fixed has been a problem for a lot of guilds. That's why quite a few people have wiped. Absolutely. But there's more to it than that. There's also the DPS check in Phase 2. You want to kill the ads before the advisors respawn. Hell, I'm sure a lot of people are wiping in Phase 1, learning how to position the advisor, so don't get that wrong. Then there's Phase 2. You need to get that properly. You need to have high DPS. You need to have proper positioning. You need to have the tanks not losing aggro to the weapon. You need to have the healers keeping the tanks up, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of damage that goes down here, and a lot of damage that needs to be done. Then there's Phase 3, all advisors at once. Can be easy to lose people. And then Phase 4, you fuck up Pyroblast, you wipe. It's that simple. You screw up mind controls, you may wipe. You screw up you screw up positioning Flame Strike, you lose people, and all on. It just creates a vicious circle. Kael'thas isn't really that difficult, but learning all those mechanics, learning to get to deal with that, and then having the high DPS that you want in Phase 2 and to a degree in Phase 3 may lead to it being... is what leads to him having such a high wipe percentage according to Warcraft logs. And then Lady Vash. Well, what is there to say on Lady Vash? Lady Vash can be very annoying with the stuns that she does on tanks and the coordination that is required of guilds to deal with the fucking cores. All these years down the line, people still can't throw the cores properly. Killing the ads properly, dealing with the cores, not letting elementals, blue elementals get to Vash, killing the green elementals before they despawn, having proper positioning, and then not wiping in Phase 3 to mind controls and all that. I mean, there isn't much to say on Vash. There's RNG that is required that, you know, people do need to deal with. I mean, you can make a macro to unequip your weapons when the mind control is coming, so you're not killing people with the mind control. But of course, there's, you know, the threat drops that people dealt with. There's also the coordination with the shocks, the stuns that she does on the tank, and also with Blessing of Freedom as well. So you don't want to mess that up. And then there's, of course, just plain bad RNG. And that's what leads to these kind of statistics if we're looking on this list. I'm sure things are going to get better, but Vash being the hardest boss in Tier 5, well, it's not really surprising, honestly, considering everything. Like, she was the hardest boss even on private servers harder than Kael. Kael may be a longer fight, he may be a more frustrating fight. One thing to also consider in terms of these numbers, or the number of guilds that have managed to not clear the content, is that a lot of guilds are only doing a 2-day raiding schedule, which, if you're trying to learn tier 5 and trying to clear it quickly, is just not enough at the start, especially for guilds that haven't done a good amount of PTR. It's one thing to mess around a couple hours in PTR, it's another thing to actually clear the raids in PTR and then do it on live. Very different, and a lot of guilds didn't manage, I think, to clear the raiding content on PTR, and we're seeing this reflected in the numbers. But then finally, we also have to talk about how the overall player base is like right now. From Ironforge.pro, we can see that right now the total number of players until the 22nd of September, but the total number of players showing up on the logs is just shy of 380,000. It's gone up since the summer by, let's just say, 25,000, maybe even closer to 30,000. So the numbers have gone up, but things are still looking pretty bad, especially for some of these servers. Now, why does this matter, you might ask? Well, the reason this matters is because this is just, we're still early on. And if these numbers don't go up, you are going to see attrition. There is attrition. There's always been attrition in World of Warcraft throughout the entirety of its existence. But if there's no new players replacing those that are lost at a greater rate, then what that's going to lead to is a lot of problems for a lot of guilds on a lot of servers, especially for Black Temple and for Sunwell Plateau. For Black Temple, it's the attunement process, to a degree gear. For Sunwell Plateau, well, doing Sunwell Plateau without a fully tier 6 geared raid is a major issue. It can be a pretty big issue for a lot of guilds. You just need the DPS, you need the tank survivability, you need the healing output. So you need people geared with a lot of tier 6 gearing. If people are quitting, they're not getting replaced. If those people are not getting geared, then a lot of guilds will struggle in Sunwell Plateau on this alone. So it's a player base issue. And I'm sure this has already contributed to the numbers we've seen in terms of how many guilds have been unable to clear tier 5 so far. Yeah, I'm sure those numbers are going to get better over the next couple of weeks, next few days even. But it is, I admit, surprising to see how things have turned out. But I guess it shouldn't necessarily be, considering how a lot of people decided to treat Burning Crusade and how a lot of people decided to treat tier 5 in general. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.